Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ophthalmology Business Academy podcast. We help you develop your ideal practice with help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, and more. I am Dr. Deep Parikh, one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Every listener of the podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy at www.obacademy.org. The membership is on us, and it's our gift to you. Today, I'm very excited to talk to Dr. Mark Lobanoff, a cornea, LASIK, and refractive surgeon, as well as a successful entrepreneur. He is the founder of the practice OVO LASIK and Lens and serves as the CEO of Fircities LLC. Our topic today is current status of LASIK, as well as the rise in EVO ICLs and restorative lens exchange, or refractive lens exchange / clear lens exchange. Let's jump in. Before we get started, Dr. Lobanoff, nice to have you on the podcast. I'm on the East Coast in New York City, and you're out in Minneapolis, and it took a little coordinating, but I'm glad we were able to set this up. And why don't you take a second to tell us a little bit about yourself? You know, I think listeners would be very interested to hear your particular story of how you got into ophthalmology, how you got into refractive surgery, and just a little bit about, you know, how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. Deep, first, I got to say thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's just an honor to be here, and love to get the chance to talk about some of these issues. Boy, my story, it began back in Michigan. I grew up in the Detroit area, knew I wanted to go into medicine, and so pursued in my undergraduate career, was in zoology, marine biology, and then from there went to University of Michigan for medical school. And it was during that time at University of Michigan that I became more interested in research. And I was fortunate enough to be selected for a Howard Hughes Research Fellowship. And the beauty of the Howard Hughes Research Fellowship was you got to go out to NIH for a full year. And they provided your housing, they paid you a nice stipend, and you could pick any lab that you wanted to work in, and just wanted to pick something that was interesting. And strangely enough, I chose your area of expertise in ophthalmology. I went into uveitis. So I worked at the National Eye Institute's Laboratory of Immunology. I worked on immunotolerance to lens proteins and how the thymus differentiates self from non-self. And so it's funny that, you know, early in my career, I kind of touched on your area of expertise. Following that, I completed medical school and just decided I wanted to go across the country and try to get the best training I could and really see some different parts of the country. So did my internship in internal medicine out at University of California, spent a year out there, then went to Emory in Atlanta. And I chose Emory because it was a very good program, but Emory's unique in that the one teaching hospital there, Grady, is the only trauma hospital for the entire city of Atlanta, which is a big, major metropolitan area. And it's a tough residency. You work really hard, but I knew coming out of there, I'd see everything. There's nothing that would shock me after that. And so following my residency at Emory, that's really actually was at Emory that I became interested in refractive surgery. This was the early days of LASIK. And Dr. Doyle Stalting and Dr. George Waring were two huge pioneers early on in LASIK.
Mark, around what year is this?
So we're looking at about 1997 era, 1998, 1999.
Okay.
LASIK was just coming to the United States. They're just transferring from just doing PRK to doing LASIK. And these two pioneers were really on the forefront of that. And so I got to see the work they're doing. I got to see the results of their LASIK surgery. I got to do some research with them. And the moment that I saw a patient lay down, legally blind, and literally minutes later, they could sit up, painless procedure, and could see around the room 20/20, I just said, that's amazing. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. That's what I want to do with my life. So based upon my excitement for that experience, I sought out a LASIK cornea fellowship and succeeded in obtaining a fellowship at University of Minnesota. And so for a full year, worked on on cornea, LASIK, refractive surgery, complex surgeries in the anterior segment. And then from there, really began my career. I went out to Colorado and Denver for 3 years to see what life was like there. Met my wife, who's from Minnesota. Didn't realize there's an unwritten rule in Minnesota. Minnesota women will not permanently leave the state. So we ended up moving back to raise our family there, and was in practice for a number of years before I started to get a little bit bored. I love ophthalmology, I love what we're doing, but I just needed another spark. And that's where I kind of began my entrepreneurial journey, and began my first product, which was Forcities. And Forcities is software to help surgeons calculate the best topography-guided LASIK surgery. Topography-guided LASIK was a very interesting concept. It was being used in Europe for many years as a repair procedure. So off-centered ablations, early LASIK ablations that had very small optical zones, and patients had a lot of glare halo effects, repairing scars or even keratoconus. And so US surgeons were very interested in this repair technology. We were petitioning to have it brought to the United States. Alcon was brave enough to take that on. And so Alcon came to the FDA and said, we want to bring topography-guided LASIK to the United States. FDA said, fine, but first you have to do a safety study. You have to do this on regular, normal, virgin corneas. So reluctantly, Alcon said, okay. They did the study, and to their amazement, it was the best LASIK results ever reported to the FDA. So suddenly Alcon said, oh, we've got something here. And they rolled out Contura, the brand name for topography-guided LASIK, to the United States, and it didn't work. And I was one of the first in line to get this because I'd been wanting this as a repair procedure for so long. And then when I saw the FDA results, I was so excited to offer it to my patients. And sure enough, the results didn't match the FDA. They weren't as good. Well, I mentioned Doyle Stalting was my mentor at Emory, and he ran the FDA study. So I called Doyle up.
Mm.
Well, what's happening? Why am I not getting better results? And he said, Mark, this was a safety study. No fewer than 3 cornea experts looked at every cornea before it was allowed in the study. So only corneas with perfect topography were let in. And I said, oh, that's the reason. So for 2-3 years, Alcon tried many different approaches to try to tell surgeons how best to calculate this. None of the approaches were really working. And then finally, they were going to give up on it. And I said, I've got an idea. There's this branch of software called geographic imaging software. And it's used in the real world to combine topography, hills and valleys, with, let's say, road maps or vegetation maps or rainfall maps. And the software can compress the information from a variety of sources to create a more realistic model of what you're seeing in the real world. And so I thought, well, could we apply GIS software to topography-guided LASIK? So I approached 10 companies that build GIS software, and 9 of the 10 said, you're crazy, and they didn't want to talk to me. And the other one said, you're crazy, but we'll sit down and just see what you're talking about.
Mark, quick question. So at this point, so it sounds like this is a great idea. Where did you learn about this software? Was it somewhere in your education, or how did you know about this? Because it's it's obviously it's sort of a translational thing. It's a technology being used somewhere else, and you're saying, hey, maybe this can have some use in refractive surgery.
It's kind of a little bit of a funny story. So I had been asked by Alcon to come out to the ESCRS meeting in Portugal. So we're in Portugal, and I'm sitting in this room with some of the world's top refractive surgeons. And 6 of the 7 said, we can't figure this Contura topography guided out. We should really only allow it to be used in limited circumstances. And I just thought, gosh, there's so much potential here. Well, the next day, I got on a tour bus, and I thought it was a tour bus for Lisbon, Portugal. And it was the wrong tour bus because I don't speak Portuguese. So it takes me out to the coast of Portugal, which, strangely enough, is this beautiful place called Cabo da Roca. And it's the westernmost point of the Eurasian landmass. It's the furthest west you could go back in the day. And for thousands of years, it was considered the end of the earth. And there's this beautiful topography, these cliffs cascading down to the ocean. And I'm looking at this topography, and I just thought to myself, how does the real world look at topography? How do they use information about cliffs like this and everything else? So I go back to the United States and I start doing some research, and I realize, oh, there's a whole branch of software that's meant at looking at topography and pulling information about slope and contour and shape. And I thought, I wonder if this could be applied to topography of the cornea. And that was really the aha moment, serendipity of getting on the wrong bus in Portugal. And things kind of led from there.
That's fantastic. Okay, and then at this point, you're talking to these companies. One company is saying, "Hey, you're absolutely nuts, but maybe we'll give this a shot." Are you working as a consultant for any of these companies, or you're just sort of an independent guy out there with a great idea?
I was an independent guy, an independent surgeon, and I said, "I've got a problem. There isn't a solution in the market right now. Can we build a solution? Can we build a better mousetrap? Can we maybe look at this from a completely different approach than people have looked at before?" And that's where I began working with this company. And when they saw the topography map of the cornea, they said, "That's a topography map." And I said, "Exactly. All we're talking about is differences of scale. We deal in microns, you deal in kilometers." But once they realized it was topography driven, they said, "Yes, of course we can apply this." And that's where I began working with the software engineers. I started working on the mathematics and physics behind it, and we had a product. Lo and behold, it worked. And so that kind of began the journey for entrepreneurship. I built a company around it. We began working with Alcon and forming a licensing agreement, and now it's used across the world and on every continent by hundreds of surgeons. So I was really proud of that. But it reignited my passion for ophthalmology. And now I had this new interest in entrepreneurship. So I thought, well, we've really helped out LASIK surgery. We've moved that ball forward. Could we do the same for cataract surgery? And that led to the second company.
Mark, how long were you in practice before the development of your first company? And then another question I have is, how'd you put such a great team together?
A little bit was trial and error, and a little bit was just blind luck. So the first one or two software engineers I worked with weren't quite the right fit. I don't think they quite saw the vision. And then just by chance, I met this software programmer known as Boris Momchev. And Boris had the advantage of having a deep understanding of physics. So he had a PhD in physics, and he's also one of the most brilliant programmers I've ever met. And so he understood the concepts between the physics of light and lenses, and we could talk the same mathematical and physics language. And so I would come to him and say, "Here's the medical problem. Here's what I believe will be the solution to it." And then he would help me build the software around that. And really, it was just a very tight-knit team. For Forces, it was just the two of us. We had a few other software engineers that we hired to write some of the code, but primarily it's just the two of us. And began from there.
And this was how many years into practice?
Yes, so this was probably about 18 years into practice for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then from there, now you had an idea for a second company.
I had an idea for a second company. So the idea was I had seen Zeiss Veracity. And the first time I saw it at ACOS, I said, "That's an amazing idea. These folks have done a great job. They're really doing something wonderful for ophthalmology." And my hat is still tipped off to them. And so what Veracity did is it would pull information from diagnostic machines and would pull it into the cloud so that you could use a variety of IOL formulas to calculate lenses. And it solved some problems. It made things more efficient. It solved the problems of transcription errors. In the past, what we were accustomed to, we would print out the results from, say, an IOL master or Pentacam AXL. You would have to take that data, hand type it into a nomogram for an IOL. Then if you want, that got you the sphere power. And then if you wanted to calculate the toric power, you had to go to another calculator, enter everything all again. And every time you put some data in, there's a chance for a transcription error, a mistake. So Veracity solved that problem. But what I was a little disappointed with is Veracity stopped there. So it was as good, used the same formulas I'd always used, used the data from my machines, made things more accurate, but didn't push things anything further. So I thought, let's do that. Let's do all that. Let's improve the efficiency. Let's improve the accuracy, remove transcription errors. but can we let software and artificial intelligence help guide the surgeon, make the surgeon better? And that's the whole goal behind iTelligence. So I'm really proud of one of the tools we have. Think of this. You have a patient and you're doing retinal surgery on this patient. They're a high myop. Let's say, I did surgery recently on a -28, okay? Highly myopic eye. Now, usually a highly myopic eye is very long. Anterior posterior length is very long. And that also usually means that their anterior chamber is very deep. And so if you ask a surgeon, say, what formula do you use for really long myopic eyes? They may give you a formula, SRKT or Holiday True K. But then you say, okay, what about an eye that's really long, but has a shallow anterior chamber? And you'll get a blank look from the surgeon because they don't know. And I thought about this and I thought, well, this -28 patient I had actually had an axial length of 24, a normal axial length. And it was due to the lens shape that was so different. And I thought, I don't really know what formula to use here, but we can use big data to help us out. So we have a database of tens of thousands of successfully performed cataract surgeries. So what iTelligence does is it looks at the physical parameters for each eye, goes back into the database, finds eyes with similar physical characteristics, determines which formulas would have been most accurate, and lets the surgeon know these are the most accurate formulas. So for decades, we've used these IOL formulas, and the formula will say, okay, based on our formula, we think a 24.0 lens is going to get you closest to 0. But we've never had software assist us in saying, this is likely the right formula to use. And so this really changes the game. And then we've built in a variety of other tools.
So,
Sorry.
Mark, just one question, comes to mind, of course, is that database that you're building off of, is this collected from different surgeons? Like, who's part of this? Is this Ascaris data? Is this Iris registry data? Yeah.
This is data from personal surgeons who had donated their data, de-identified all the patient information. The key with data, as you're training models and AI models, is the quality of the data is critical. And one of the things I learned as I began doing research is not all centers are equally committed to extremely meticulous manifest refractions post-surgery. They're not always completely dedicated to really pushing the patient to their full visual acuities. And so I had to think in my head, how do I separate these data sources? So I have what are called platinum sources. Platinum sources are what I call the source of truth. I know these centers are very meticulous with their refractions. They hire extremely experienced technicians. This is the highest quality data that I can get, but it's limited. To train a model, you need more data. And so now we take data from a variety of different sources. And this global database is going to be a little more messy. Some are more meticulous than others. You hope that with enough data, you can kind of cancel out the noise. But we always will be able to check the main database compared to the platinum database and make sure the two are not deviating too far. So that was a unique challenge. As you begin working with data and analytic models and AI, you got to be very careful about your data sources and the quality of the data that's being used to train these computer systems.
And that's one of the things, I mean, we're seeing in general with ChatGPT and a lot of the criticism that some people have about AI is if the data that it's taking is incorrect, you're going to get an incorrect result.
And so I think AI is an incredibly powerful tool. Keyword is tool. It's not magic. And I think a lot of the general public and even a lot of surgeons, they hear AI and they think this must be the ultimate source of truth.
Yes.
But then the more you start studying AI, you worry about hallucinations, where, for instance, you ask ChatGPT, who moved the Statue of Liberty? And it will say, oh, Edgar Allan moved the Statue of Liberty in 1873 across the Mojave Desert. Well, no one's ever moved the Statue of Liberty like that. It has made up a fact. In a ChatGPT setting, not such a big deal. When you're choosing an intraocular lens,
Correct.
or you're choosing,
Correct.
Something that's going to affect patient care, you really better make sure and test that, exquisitely to make sure it's not hallucinating. And so We have a combined approach with both my companies, Forcities and with iTelligence, in double checking things and having algorithms, human-based algorithms, to constantly monitor what AI is saying and to double check everything. And many safeguards are built into that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially as you said, it's sort of when patient care is involved, and this is not something there has to be multiple levels of double checking involved.
Absolutely. And there's a concept of drift. A lot of these AI models will begin at a very accurate level, but strangely enough, they can begin to drift over time. And so the models themselves can evolve, sometimes in a good way, but sometimes in a bad way.
Interesting. We talked about you training sort of towards the very beginning of LASIK around 1997, and again, for those listening, I specialize in uveitis and retina, and which is sort of a very different part of ophthalmology than refractive surgery and LASIK. But LASIK and refractive surgery is a very interesting field, and the patient satisfaction is sort of like none other.
Yeah.
Where do you see LASIK from 1997? Sort of, where has it moved, and where do you see it going in the future? As someone who's not a refractive surgeon, I hear about things like SMILE. I hear about different procedures, but tell me a little bit about where the field is now since 1997 and where we're going.
It really has evolved so far. So in the early days of LASIK, we used blade devices, microkeratomes, to create the flaps. They could create buttonholes. The flaps were not equally thick from center to periphery. They were often, to be safe, we made really thick flaps, which cut through a lot of corneal nerves. So the early days of LASIK, people were very excited about the improvement in vision. But what was pulling it back? Complaints of dry eye, complaints of glare, nighttime issues. And unfortunately, it was these early setbacks that produced a little bit of fear in the public mindset about LASIK. So the researchers went back and they began making it better. We started getting tracking systems. We could track eye movement, and the treatment would follow the eye if it was moving a little bit. That allowed the treatment to be placed in the right spot. After the trackers, we started playing around with wavefront guided LASIK. So taking a wavefront analysis of how light is traveling through the eye, trying to calculate a better way to treat the eye, not only the sphere cylinder, but also any higher order aberrations. But there are problems with that. And that is that a patient's lens accommodates. And as the lens shifts and as the pupil size changes second to second, that wavefront map also changed second to second. And this is why wavefront guided LASIK really has fallen by the wayside. It was, the measurements were not routinely predictable and consistent. So then the researchers went back and said, okay, the majority of higher order aberrations come from the cornea, and the cornea topography doesn't change. What if we correct the cornea topography to eliminate these higher order aberrations? This was consistent, repeatable, and it works. And you're right, LASIK has a very high satisfaction rate, but also a very demanding patient base. They're paying cash out of pocket, not insurance-based, and they're expecting really amazing results. I think in my opinion, the most advanced area of LASIK right now is Forcities planned Contura LASIK, topography guided. Why do I say that? Well, I was part of a 4-group prospective study published in JCRS, and what we found is that 100% of the eyes treated this way achieved 20/20 vision uncorrected. 89% achieved 20/15 uncorrected vision, whereas before with glasses, only 45% could see that. So for the first time ever, we're taking patients and getting them to see better than their glasses or contacts can. A recent study published in the Dove Press by Rush Eye Associates, when they looked at binocular acuity, uncorrected, the way patients really walk around and see the world, not with one eye, but both eyes open, binocular acuity, Forcities planned Contura, 100% of the patients saw 20/15 uncorrected. Think of that. 100% of the patients are walking around with 20/15 uncorrected. And then they did a prowl study, patient-reported outcomes, not just the quantity of vision, how far
Right.
down in the chart you can read. 5 was the highest satisfaction you could get. 100% of the patients rated their vision a 5 afterwards. So 100% of the patients were completely satisfied with their vision in this study. This is the level of refractive surgery I want to get to.
So
And so
Mark, these results are amazing. Tell me one more time. This is four cities planned.
So my software Forcities plans these complex topography guided treatments.
Okay.
And if you follow that recommendation and treat with topography guided Contura, based on what Forcities is telling you to choose as the treatment, these were the outcomes. And prospective studies, so powerful. Ours was a multi-center, 4 centers. This other was a private center, confirming their results. But these results have been consistently repeated across the world, showing just absolutely amazing results.
So Mark, for patients out there that are choosing a LASIK surgeon, and we have a lot of them in New York City, how does a patient know what kind of LASIK they're getting, what kind of tool the surgeon is using? Is there any guidance for even ophthalmologists that are going to refer their patients to a refractive surgeon?
Kavit emptor, buyer beware. Okay. The problem is most patients are not that technologically savvy. And a lot of times they'll say, well, I'm going to go where my friend went, or I heard this advertisement on the radio, something like
Right.
that. The problem is right now we only have one topography guided LASIK system in the United States, and that's Alcon's Wavelight laser. Not to say other platforms don't do a good job. That's the beauty. LASIK across the board, all the companies have really raised their game since those early days of 2000. But some have stopped. So Vizx really has not brought anything new to the market in over a decade. Now, Bausch & Lomb is bringing a new laser to the US, the Teneo. I'm part of the FDA study. I'm very bullish on that laser. It's going to have some amazing new features within the next couple of years. And I know other companies Zeiss is starting to come out with a new laser as well. But I think it really falls upon the patient to do some research and to say, okay, what are the results? What laser are you using? What are your results? And one of the things that we do at our clinic is I can show you my real data. I love showing patients and saying, let me tell you this. One thing Forces will do is I can look at your age, your refraction, and say, okay, let's put all the patients that have similar age and refractive errors that what were their outcomes? And I can show the percent 2015, 2020. And I say, these are real results from our clinic with our laser treating patients who are just like you. That's very powerful. And in my opinion, that's the way that I like to perform refractive surgery.
That's awesome. And like you said, it's sort of hard for patients, and I guess there's variability in the equipment that different surgeons use, and it's sort of hard to tell who's using the latest technology.
Right. I mean, there's a group in town, I'm not going to name them, but they say in their ads, we have the latest technology. And I thought, well, no, you don't. You bought your laser in 1999. It hasn't been upgraded since 2006.
Yeah.
And so it's really confusing
Yeah.
for patients. And so I think that is one of the challenges. And look, I get it. This equipment's expensive. And if you've
Yeah.
spent $500,000 on a piece of equipment and it's still working, you're a little reluctant to maybe upgrade to the next level. I'm a perfectionist though, and so I want to work with the very best tools. And so I kind of follow that approach.
Mark, you've used the Visian ICL for over 15 years. I wanted to ask you, how has the introduction of the EVO platform changed its use in your practice?
Sometimes companies will make incremental changes and try to make a big deal about it. This is the real deal. So hats off to Star Surgical. The problem before was the Visian that originally came out was a solid lens. Soft, flexible, thin, but solid. And because fluid is created in the posterior aspect of the eye and flows up through the pupil into the anterior chamber, theoretically the Visian could move forward and could block the pupil could lead to pupillary block, increased intraocular pressure. So back in those days, we'd use a YAG laser, and I'd have to punch 2 holes in the iris to provide that peripheral iridotomy to make sure that if there ever was pupillary closure, there was a way for fluid to get from back to front. It worked, but yagging an iris is not the most comfortable procedure. Sometimes would elicit, as you know, from uveitis. If you're stirring up proteins from the iris, it could create some inflammation in the anterior chamber. You can also have issues with glare. Light could get through these 2 holes and sometimes create some glare. So Star went back, redesigned it, created these 5 ports, these small holes in the EVO platform that allow fluid to get from back to front. So no longer do you have to YAG the iris. Well, now you've made the procedure simpler, more comfortable, and it's really been a beautiful addition to the refractive surgery armamentarium. For patients who have got a thinner cornea, for patients who have higher corrections, -10, -15, -20, it's really a godsend.
And so, I'm glad you mentioned that because, YAG, laser iridotomy, laser iridotomy is a safe procedure for the most part, but you're absolutely right. I mean, some patients have these complications. They have uveitis, they have certain issues. So if you can avoid it, I think that's a useful thing.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about refractive lens exchange. I think you've mentioned to me that you like the term restorative lens exchange. Can you tell me a little bit about it? What patients are you doing that on instead of LASIK, or who would be a good candidate for that? And where do you think that's going?
I think this is really the future of refractive surgery. I've been so surprised at the acceptance of this procedure and the growth of this procedure over the last 2 years in my practice. And every time I perform one of these procedures, the patients are extremely pleased. They're very happy. But the first thing they say is, I can't believe I never heard of this before. And I talk to my friends and they've never heard of this before, which tells me there is a huge unmet need of patients who are anywhere from, say, 45 on. Once the natural human lens is not functioning at its optimal level, once it can no longer accommodate and flex. And if you look at most lenses, a 20-year-old's lens is crystal clear. A 30-year-old, you can actually detect a trace amount of haze in that lens at the slit lamp. 40, maybe a little more, 50, a little more. They're not cataracts yet, but there is some haze there. And it's affecting nighttime vision. And it's affecting sometimes contrast sensitivity. They're golfing on the golf course. They lose that golf ball in the, gray sky. So at that point, we now have lenses, in my opinion, that work better than a malfunctioning human lens. Once that natural lens has lost its ability to accommodate and lost its full clarity, a lot of these new artificial lenses are so good that they can supersede the natural human lens. And it's the onset of these beautiful new trifocal lenses, these innovative, let's say, small aperture lenses like the IC8 Apthera, these new monofocal plus lenses that give 2 zones of vision, distance and mid-range with no glare or halo, the ability to do light adaptable lenses to, after the lens is implanted, customize the output for the near, intermediate, and far for the patient and let them choose their selections. These new lenses have completely changed the field, changed the game. So we now finally, for the first time, have the tools in our hands to take these patients to the refractive level that we could with LASIK and even beyond. So with LASIK, after age 50, I'm limited to both eyes distance, wearing readers, or monovision. When I have these lens implants, I have all sorts of mix and match strategies. I have all sorts of optical strategies, and we can tailor the patient's lifestyle and what their desired outcome is to the correct lens. And so I think this is an area that's going to see huge growth in the next 10 years.
And you think, and based on that, you think people will start having this done at earlier ages. I mean, if you're noticing a little bit of lens opacity in people's 40s, then we're talking about what you're suggesting is not waiting until people are 65 and stop driving at night before they do surgery.
Let's take some extreme examples. Okay, I've got 2 patients that I've treated in the last 3 months. One is -28, 8 diopters cylinder. Okay.
Wow.
She was contact lens intolerant. So her glasses, you can imagine, are an inch thick. She's a cook and she's working over steaming pots of water. The steam would, of course, invariably fog up her glasses. That's not a good solution for her. But if we can implant a lens, and we did to get her to 20/20 uncorrected, she has distance and J1 plus near acuity, you've changed that woman's life. On the other side of the spectrum, I had a patient who's a plus 15. Now he's 26. And so somebody might say, well, yeah, but his lens can accommodate. Yeah, but he's got a plus 15 correction. You don't have a Visian EVO that can correct that. Contact lenses that thick are not very comfortable to wear. Okay. Glasses are going to create way too much distortion. And so really the lens option was the best option for this patient. And I think those are extremes, but more and more, as these lenses keep improving, that age limit goes from 60, 55, 50 to 45, maybe eventually to 40, where you begin to consider lens-based options before you start thinking of excimer laser surgery options on the cornea.
And I was thinking what you said, as these lens options keep getting better, it seems like every year, every 2 years, we have new lenses that are coming out. Now, for some of us, tell us, we've heard a lot about multifocal lenses causing glare and halos. Tell us a little bit about the new lenses and do they not have as much glare that patients report?
So when I begin talking to patients about this, I let them know that, let's say the Panoptix from Alcon, okay? It's really the 7th generation multifocal lens. We began with multifocal lenses back around 2001, 2002 with the Array, and the early lenses were awful. Okay, you got to start somewhere, but boy, they had tremendous glare and halo at night. They would provide distance and near, but no intermediate, or distance intermediate, no near, or the near was like a +4 add and too close. But the engineers had to work through these issues. They had to find solutions, and the lenses evolved. Now, where they're at now, I think, is excellent. I actually put the Panoptix into my own wife back in April. I believe in it that much. But I warn each patient, and I show them a video. I say, okay, you're going to see rings around lights at night. Here's a picture of what that looks like the first month. Here's what it looks like after 3 months, and the brain has undergone neuroadaptation, and this is what patients report to us. Would you be okay if your nighttime vision looked like this, but you could see near, mid-range, and far? 99% of patients say, yes, I'm on board with that. But you've educated them. You've given them a realistic understanding of the benefits and the detractions.
Correct.
And some will self-select out. And for those who say, no, nighttime's really important. I treated a Delta Airlines pilot recently, and he's like, Mark, I land jumbo jets at night in the rain. I can't have any distortion of those lights. I said, I got that. I understand. Let's not use a multifocal for you. Let's use one of these monofocal plus lenses so you have distance in mid-range. You can see all your instruments in the cockpit. You can see beautiful nighttime, no distortion. Maybe you got to use readers. I'm on board with that. And this is what I mean is you can find the solution tailored to each individual's needs and desires following surgery. But
Mark,
be honest.
yeah, you're absolutely right. That conversation that's sort of the most important thing, I think, for any procedure in medicine. I mean, you gotta lay the risks, benefits, and out there and let the patient decide.
Yes. And what I have found is if you are honest and upfront with patients ahead of time, and if they have that issue occur and it's bothersome to them, you can say, I'm with you. I'm going to be with you to the end of this. And if this is not the right solution, let's do a lens exchange. Let's find something else to make this better. And as long as that patient knows you're their advocate, you're there with you on this journey, you want the same thing they do, the best outcome possible, and you're honest all along the way, you have a patient for life.
So, Mark, that's fascinating. So we have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask you one last question before I start wrapping things up. That's, you founded 2 companies. You're a state-of-the-art refractive surgeon. One, how do you have time for all this stuff? And how do you make time and find the energy, and then also make time to be on our podcast?
I love this stuff. I told you a couple years ago I was getting burnt out, and once I began getting into the entrepreneurial aspect of some of these things, this passion just reignited. And once you're passionate about something, it's no longer work. And Look, I'll admit I'm a little bit of a dork. I work nights, weekends on this stuff. I geek out on all this stuff. But when I look at, let's say, the iTelligence platform we've built for Bausch and Lomb, and I'm using it to calculate the lenses for my cases, and I say, this is pretty cool. It's a great feeling. And when other surgeons come up and say, Mark, I had a patient, they had a really complex cornea. I used four cities. They're 20/20. Thank you. When you get an accolade from a fellow colleague like that, it's just such a great feeling. It drives you forward. But I don't sleep enough and I drink a lot of coffee.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lobanoff, for joining us today and talking to us about current status of LASIK, as well as the rise in EVO ICLs and restorative lens exchange. We appreciate it very much. I had a great time talking to you. I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, kindly share it with your friends and on social media. Also, please don't forget to write a review on iTunes or Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. Till we meet again, wishing all of you an amazing week ahead.